Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Vault Fox, and today I'm going to show you how I painted up my Captain Rex helmet from the Clone Wars. Now I'm going to preface off this video and let you know that this helmet print did not go exactly as planned, and I ended up having to hack off the chin of it, but that's going to be for another video. But I did kind of want to give you a couple of the before shots of this helmet before I went over it with a lot of Bondo. It was not the best, and one of these days I'm going to have a helmet that will print with absolutely no issues, but today was not that day. This paint job starts off like most of my other clones, and that's with a nice flat white going on all over the helmet. I use Montana Gold and Shock White, but you can use any type of spray paint, acrylic paint, airbrush paint that you like, as long as it's kind of an off-white. You don't want pristine white colors here because the clones are dirty and you're just going to end up having to do more weathering that way. Once my base coat is all nice and dry, I'm going in with some painter's tape and masking off the area around Rex's visor that I want to spray paint blue. Masking can definitely get tedious, so make sure you're in a comfortable spot in your house to do this. That's why I'm upstairs in my office. Make sure you got a podcast or a YouTube video on while you're doing it so you're not bored, and make sure to always reference your reference images as I'm doing here. Don't be scared to tape it down and reposition it as you see fit. I do that a lot in this video just to make sure I'm getting the right angles. You'll get it eventually. And as another side note, you definitely don't have to do this type of technique. You can just go freehanded if you see fit. You can go in with some acrylics and just, if you have a real steady hand, you can freehand these markings. I don't have a steady hand and I'm not good at that, so I'm doing this masking technique. Now that I'm liking the way that his visor markings are looking, I'm going in with some random coupons and newspaper clippings that I have around all of the exposed other areas on the helmet that are white that I don't want to get blue. This is just a way to save on using a lot of tape. It cuts down on, waste and things like that. You definitely can use tape, but I like to do this because I like to use my painter's tape for actually masking and not just covering up random spots that I could have used something else to do. Shout out to these Giant Eagle coupons that valiantly died in battle to help me bring Captain Rex to life. Sponsor me, Giant Eagle! And as one final step before I'm going out to my garage to spray paint, I'm just masking off the teeth so I don't have to repaint over those later. Next, I take my helmet out to my garage, and with some Montana Gold and Signal Blue, I'm just going to lightly spray paint that all over the exposed areas of the visor. I try to do this lightly and in thin passes because this paint is known to bleed, and bleed it did whenever I did this. I'll show you how I fix it up later. And as you can see, I have to film TikToks while I'm doing this. I know, my life is so difficult. After about an hour, I go back outside and start peeling off all the painter's tape to hopefully see my nice crisp lines, which, spoiler alert, they weren't crisp lines. And again, I will show you how I fix those up in a bit. But again, here I am just taking all of the paint off. It's taking me a lot longer because I've got to film it for TikTok. And if you didn't know the secret behind some of my TikToks, sometimes I peel it off and then I put it back on and I peel it off again just for that shot. So you know behind the scenes trick now. In addition to a little bit of bleeding through on the visor part, there was some overspray that my Giant Eagle coupons did not protect my helmet from. So what I'm doing is I'm going over and I'm just kind of lightly spraying that Shock White back over it just to cover that up. Though I would advise you doing this after you fix all of the visor spots, because I can't tell you how many times I picked this thing up and I ended up having white paint on my hands. So do it after this step. I ended up losing the footage where I painted in the teeth gray, but you can just use any type of dark gray that you like. I actually didn't like this dark gray and I ended up painting over it a little bit later in the process. But now what I'm doing here is I'm taking some of that blue that I used to spray paint on the visor, and I'm just going in and touching up all of the spots that I ended up getting gray or that ended up having some kind of bleed through from the original masking process. And anytime you use spray paint on a brush, make sure it's kind of a crappy brush and try to clean that brush out with some 91% alcohol as soon as you can after finishing the painting process. It's never going to fully bounce back to being a good brush, which is why I kind of recommend using a crappy brush to start out with. To avoid all of this touch-up work, you could use a different type of tape, which I was actually just introduced to by Go-Getter Greg on the Rexing Around podcast. It is a vinyl type of tape that I will link down below, and apparently it provides much cleaner lines than what I got here, so worth checking out. Once I let that visor dry, I went in and made a template for the jag eyes that are on top of Rex's helmet. First of all, I don't know how to say this because I'm from Pittsburgh, and I swear every time I say jag eyes, it sounds like jag off, so I apologize in advance. But the way I made this stencil was actually pretty simple. I went online and just looked up a template for the jag eyes, printed them out, and then cut them out with an X-Acto knife. Then once I had that negative template, I put down 3 strips of painter's tape and then drew on that template to the painter's tape and cut that template out of the painter's tape. And then I put it on top of the helmet. You can't really see it that well because my elbow is showing. My elbow is hiding it from you guys, but I promise it is on top of that helmet and it is nice and smooth. I was filming this while on a TikTok live, so that's why a lot of this footage is a little wonky. But instead of spray painting the blue onto the jag eyes, I actually went in with a brush and stippled it on there to hopefully cut down on the bleeding, which, spoiler alert, still bled through. That's okay, because I have no problem going in and touching up those eyes. I do that with the same method as touching up the visor. I take some of that white paint, just kind of go over all of the spots that bled through with my brush, and then let it dry. And now we can finally get to work on those welding lines. To be honest with you, this helmet really didn't start looking like Rex until I put these lines on there. Now how I tackled these lines is I first went over the cheek, as you can see there a little bit, and lightly went over with some pencil and just drew in the lines that I wanted to have there. But I am starting on the top of the visor because I figured this would be the easiest one and the most forgiving for the technique that I was going to use. I'm using a light bluish color that I had on hand from another cosplay, and I'm just kind of mixing that with some white to get it in different variations of blue that I wanted. I'm just kind of stippling and dry brushing a little bit as I see fit, and I'm going along the visor until I like the color. Once I was done with the visor, I went in along those cheek welds and filled in with that blue as well. And now I'm going in with a mix of a brown and red to get that nice rusted, welded effect. Whenever you paint it over top of that blue, it really kind of brings out that gross, grimy, animated feel. You're gonna have to do a couple of layers of this, and it's gonna take a lot of trial and error to get the effect that you like. But just keep going at it. What I'm doing is I'm doing a mix of wet blending as well as dry brushing to get the effect that I want, and this whole process actually took me 2 hours just to get the weld lines looking how I wanted to. So don't be afraid to take your time, experiment with wiping off the color, doing dry brushing, doing patches of darker color along the visor and other spots as you see fit, and just kind of have fun with it. This actually ended up being a lot of fun, even though I really had no clue what I was doing when I went into it. And here's a tighter shot of me doing the cheek. As you can see, just going over that blue line and painting over it with some of that rusty brown. Once I've got all of that rusty brown laid down, I'm going back over it with some of that blue that we had before. Again, just doing varying techniques of wet blending, dry brushing until I get the look that I want. And remember, if at any point in time you're not liking how it's looking, you can definitely go over all those rusty brown spots with some white to tone it down a bit, and you can even expand the blue welding line if you see fit. It's all just paint. If you make a mistake, you can paint over it. It might take a couple coats, but you can fix it. Once those welds are looking how I want them, I'm moving on to the welds that are around the ear as well as down the visor and into the inset of the cheek as well. I didn't notice these until looking at the CRL, which I usually consult whenever I'm working on helmets, and boy was I mad that I had to go back and do that. Once all of that paint was dry, it was time to get into putting in the visor. To do that, I just took some painter's tape on the inside and made a template for myself. And I stuck that template to the back of a welding visor, cut that out with some tin snips, and then just hot glued that into the inside of Captain Rex's helmet. Now for one of my favorite parts of helmet building, and that is weathering. What I typically like to do is take some black acrylic paint, some water, and just mix that into a cup and create what is known as a black wash. I take that black wash and then I paint it all over the helmet, making sure to get into every little nook and cranny that could possibly get dirty. And I kind of let that sit there for about maybe half a minute to a minute, and then I wipe it off with a paper towel. I like to use the blue paper towels that are usually at like AutoZone and auto supply stores. They leave a lot less lint behind, but you can use any type of paper towel that you want. And if you don't like how dirty this comes out in the first try, you can always continue to layer on more and more layers of black wash, letting it sit a little bit more on each try. I'm pretty sure that I ended up doing about 5 to 6 coats of this black wash, but my black wash was pretty diluted with water, so your results may vary. When it comes to weathering, I always advise that less is more. You can always put a little bit more dirt and grime on there if you see fit, but it's actually a lot harder to take it away. So I advise going in thin layers to start out, keep on layering until you like the look of it. Once I'm done with that black wash, I'm going in with some 80 to 100 grit sandpaper and just roughing up all of the edges. Now, one thing to note whenever you're doing this is whenever you go over any blue spots, be very careful because sometimes that blue will transfer into the white and we really don't want that. So what I like to do is fold up my sandpaper and just lightly kind of scrape across the blue and try and not travel into the white as best I can. I follow a lot of other clone painters and I've seen a lot of people do it where they actually just paint the entire helmet white, weather that down with some, grays and blacks and black washes and things like that, and then they go in with the color. And one of these days I'm gonna give that a try, but this worked out well for me too. The last and final step for this build is putting some padding in there. What I like to do is just get some upholstery foam whenever it's on like 60% sale at Joann's, and I'll take that and cut it into smaller strips. I then take my hot glue gun and one of those strips and just hot glue it onto the middle inside of my helmet. Once that middle piece is in there nice and secure, I take one of the other strips I cut that in half, and then take my hot glue gun and just glue both of those little pieces onto each side of that middle piece inside of the helmet. I really like to pad my helmets this way because 1, it's pretty cheap if you can get this stuff on sale, and 2, it's adjustable. You can cut as thick of a strip as you want. You can even pull out the foam if it ends up being too big for you. It ends up being a lot better for me than the things I bought off Amazon in the past to pad my helmets. And with that, Captain Rex is all done and ready to wear. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, every single view, every single subscriber. And speaking of subscribers, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss next week's video where I show you how I took this helmet from a print to getting it ready for paint. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye!